Okay, so this is the section where we talk about the textual history of Christianity. So, Gospels, right? There are 3 synoptic Gospels, and these are called synoptic because they give us a synopsis of the life and teachings of Jesus. And this is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And they have a kind of complicated relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, just like we did with the documentary hypothesis for the Hebrew Scriptures. So synoptic Gospels, of the ones that exist, Mark is the earliest, dating to roughly 70 CE. Matthew is a little bit later, and then Luke is a little bit after that. And all 3 of these Gospels continued to change a bit, not like a lot, not transformation, but adjust and incorporate new teachings, even in the 2nd century, so the 100s. These also, they draw upon an existing tradition. You'll notice 70, 80, 90, that is all well after the lifespan of Christ, which we can roughly approximate as being 0 to 33. If you have some wiggle room in there, at the latest, we're talking 40, right? So Jesus is well and gone, in whatever manner you subscribe to, in a sense. He is well and gone long before the first official Gospels are circulating. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how the information gets from Jesus's lifetime to the text that we have. So there are earlier written sources. The Q source is just a collection of his sayings. So this is a hypothesized source. We don't have an exact version of this, but we do have a very close approximation of it, but it comes from a much later source. So we'll get into that later. But the Q source is what we would assume is a collection of Jesus's saying that was circulating already, and both Luke and Matthew draw upon the Q source to include Jesus's writings or sayings, the things that he is known to have said, in their version of the gospel story. But then there's also stuff in either one of those, Matthew and Luke, that is independent. So we assume that there must have been a traditional source, whether it's oral or written, that Matthew drew upon, which is why we call it the M source. And there must have been a separate source or a separate tradition that we're calling the L source, because that gives us the stuff in Luke that is independent. Right? So those are the 3 sources of Matthew and Luke, plus Mark. So Mark is actually the first one of the Synoptic Gospels to have been written down, but the Q source is its oldest known, probably written source, right? And Mark does not include a lot of direct material from the Q source. Instead, it has its own tradition that covers a lot of the same ground as the L source and the Q source. But textually, they are not identical. So Mark is kind of its own thing. Q source, L source, and M source are older, the sort of groundwork that goes into those Gospels. But Mark is the first Gospel to emerge. And it is a little bit of its own thing. Then what you have from Mark and Matthew and Luke is what's called the triple tradition. And that is the parts of these Gospels that overlap. Now you'll see that Mark is the source for parts of Luke and parts of Matthew. And the bits that all 3 of them share in common, that's the triple tradition, right? So Matthew and Luke came later. They both drew upon Mark, but they also drew upon the Q source and the L and M sources, right? Hang with me. It's okay. Then there are bits that Mark and Matthew share. Wait, your diagram looks the other way. Mark and Matthew share, and Mark and Luke share. And there's a little bit that's just in Mark. Just a little bit. Not a lot. Mark is largely corroborated by the other Gospels, right? Mark is the one that is the most well attested. Most of its material you can also find in another Gospel. Luke and Matthew, they each have a part of the Q source, right? The sayings of Jesus, and they each have some stuff that no other gospel has. Voila. So those are the Synoptic Gospels. They have a lot in common, and then they have some unusual other features. Not unusual, some unique. There we go. But then there's John. The Gospel of John. I love the Gospel of John. It's so weird. So all of the Gospels are actually anonymous. They're attributions to particular authors of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That all comes later. Those attributions may or may not reflect the people who actually wrote them down. But John, sorry, I just bumped my computer. John is a totally different beast. Portions of the Gospel of John date to as early as Mark, and portions of it date to a bit later, which is, so the 90 to 110, that is the same date that all the other Johannine writings date to. So we have Gospel of John, we also have the letters of John, and we have the book of Revelation. So all of those from the same community at the very least at the same time. So that's John. Synoptic Gospels. They do logical things, right? They tell the story of the life and ministry of Jesus. So Mark starts by saying there was a prophet that came to prepare the way. And this is in line with how Christians interpret Jewish prophecy about the Mashiach. And Mark is like, I'm going to begin with the forerunner, right? John the Baptist. And he says, so we quote the previous scripture, I will send my messenger ahead of you. And then we identify John the Baptist as the messenger hailing the coming of the Mashiach, right? Logical beginning. Matthew. Like, let's start with the birth of Jesus. Here's the genealogy. So he is not just born. In fact, all three Synoptic Gospels will have a nativity of Christ, more or less. Asterisk. They will all discuss where Jesus came from. Let's put it that way. But Matthew was like, let me break it down for you. Jesus is directly descended from David, and thus the King of the Jews from the line of David that we've been looking for. Also a logical beginning for somebody who's writing about Jesus as a Mashiach, right? And then Luke is like, I've read a lot of things, and I'm not totally sure where to start. I will get to the genealogy and I will get to the birth, but I also think we should start with John the Baptist, but we should start with like when John the Baptist was born, because that was also holy, right? And this is how you get the tale of Elizabeth and Zechariah, who were infertile, and then suddenly Elizabeth in her old age becomes pregnant. You know, interaction between Elizabeth and Mary, where they're two like in utero prophet Mashiach babies can recognize each other. It's a wild story if you've not read it. I highly recommend. These are the Synoptic Gospels, like logical story, logical starting points. And then you have John, who's like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Right? That is a very different beginning. This is why I love John. He's so great. So this phrase, in the beginning, this becomes really central to Johannine doctrine and to Christian debates about the divinity of Christ. In the beginning. Let's start there. Your background image is a Latin manuscript where the way this reads is in principio erat verbum. In the beginning, in principio, beginning, erat was the word, verbum. So that's the Latin version. That becomes the version that is all over the Western world thanks to Rome. But we're not there yet, right? John is originally written in Greek. The logos is the word. So NRK N ho logos. Hey logos. Logos. There you go. That's it. The logos. In the beginning was the word, right? In NRK. Arche, like ARCHE. Arche. Archon. Original. Archive. Or contic. That's all talking about the beginning of meaning, right? Was the word, the logos. That's the word. And this is a reference to the Hebrew and even to the Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures in Genesis. So in Hebrew, so just so that we're all clear, you read Hebrew right to left. That's right to left, not left to right. So trying to transliterate this is a little bit difficult because this is Bereshit that way, right? Bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And in the Septuagint, this becomes en arche. So John is making a direct connection between his gospel of Jesus and the creation of the world, which is what connects Jesus to God. So John is the gospel that is making the case that Jesus is God, right? And he does that with the way he writes. He's like, I am not writing a chronological story of the life of some dude. I am telling you the cosmic story of God. Right? That's John. Which is why I love him. He's kind of great. A little bit of a drama queen. So the Gospel of John doesn't have a lot of things that are in the other Gospels. It doesn't have parables. It doesn't have Jesus talking about the kingdom of God or the Sermon on the Mount. There's no John the Baptist or Mount of Olives or Garden of Gethsemane or even the Last Supper, which is weird because that's sacrament. There isn't even a temptation. He doesn't exorcise any demons. He does do miracles. Like he does heal people. Instead, what you find in John is a huge symbolic discourse, all of which is centered around teaching, the teachings of Christ that highlight his divinity, right? And especially the I am statements. Those are my favorite, right? So I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the bread of life. I can't remember anymore. But what's important about the I am, that's another reference that John is making to Genesis. When Moses is interacting with the burning bush, who BT dubs is Yahweh, the Midianite God. He asks, who are you, burning bush that's talking to me and not being burnt up? And the answer from this burning bush is, I am. That's his name, right? Like my name and my existence are the same. I am that I am is sometimes translated. And in the Jewish tradition, it's written with characters that are roughly equivalent to YHWH, which does not say Yahweh or Jehovah. Because the name is so holy that Jews would not write it in full, right? So YHWH is actually a stand-in, an abbreviation for the name of God, which is so holy and so coexistent with his being that you can't even write it, right? That's sacrilege because you can contain a word, but you cannot contain God. God is word. Anyway. So, right? John. He's so good.